welcome back to the Unfiltered Political Lens podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the deadly Hantavirus Outbreak and the cases of the Hantavirus and global healthcare fears. We're going to get right into it as we always do. So tonight's broadcast is one of the most important deep dives we have covered in recent months because we are discussing a virus that has quietly existed for decades, but is suddenly making international headlines again. Around the world, people are hearing frightening phrases like deadly hantavirus, international outbreak, cruise ship infections, and possible human to human spread. Yet many still do not fully understand what the hantavirus actually is or why the health officials are taking the recent developments seriously. In this special report, we are going beyond the sensational headlines and we're going to breaking down the science and the history of the symptoms of that outbreak, the concerns and the environmental factors connected to this deadly rodent-borne virus. Tonight, we are separating fear from fact so you can better understand what experts, governments, and the public health organizations are actually monitoring and why this story is becoming one of the most discussed infectious disease developments of the year. Before we begin, I please want you to make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss future emergency updates, global investigations, geopolitical developments, health alerts, and the breaking world events. Our goal here is to provide detailed information and long-form analysis, factual reporting, while also encouraging the critical thinking and the deeper conversations about the stories shaping our world today. We are going to cover everything from how the hantavirus spreads, what symptoms to look for, like why the Andes strain is different and how the cruise ships became part of the story, and what the scientists are warning about moving forward. Stay with us throughout this full breakdown because many of the details begin to be overlooked by the mainstream discussions, and they are critical to understanding the bigger picture surrounding this outbreak. The hantavirus is not a brand new virus, and that is one of the first important facts needed to understand before the panic and misinformation begins spreading online. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the World Health Organization, the hantaviruses are a family of viruses carried primarily by rodents, and humans usually become infected after they have gotten exposure to contaminated urine, saliva, or droppings from infected animals. The danger also increases when microscopic particles containing the virus become airborne and are inhaled by people cleaning contaminated areas such as garages, sheds, barns, cabins, and crawl spaces, or abandoned buildings. Unlike some highly contagious respiratory viruses that spread mainly through everyday human interaction, the hantavirus has historically been linked more closely to the environmental exposure involving rodent activity. One of these reasons the hantavirus has generated so much fear recently is because the severe infections can become deadly very quickly, especially when the symptoms are not recognized early on. According to the health agencies, some forms of the hantavirus pulmonary syndrome in the Americas have fatality rates approaching 38 to 50% in severe respiratory cases. That number alone immediately grabs the attention because it means that it's not simply another mild seasonal virus. When the hantavirus progresses in advanced respiratory illnesses, patients can deteriorate rapidly within a matter of days. They sometimes even require intensive care, oxygen support, or a mechanical ventilation to survive. The frightening reality about the hantavirus is that earlier symptoms often look almost identical to the common illness like influenza or COVID-19 for the most recent incidents. food poisoning, or general viral infections as well. Many of the patients initially experience fevers, chills, headaches, fatigue, nausea and vomiting, or muscle pain, and abdominal discomfort before realizing anything serious is happening. Now, because of those symptoms that appear so ordinary at first, many people delay seeking the medical care, assuming they simply have the flu or another temporary illness. Meanwhile, the virus can continue progressing toward a far more dangerous second phase, involving respiratory collapse and fluid buildup inside the lungs. Doctors describe the pulmonary phase of the hantavirus infection as a sudden, aggressive, and potentially catastrophic. If the treatment is delayed during this stage, patients may develop severe coughing, chest tightness, dangerous low oxygen levels, and shortness of breath. Low blood pressure and the signs of organ failure, and some individuals deteriorate within the 24 hours to 48 hours after their respiratory symptoms began, which is why the infectious disease specialist stresses the importance of rapid recognition and emergency hospitalization. According to the CDC, early intensive medical care dramatically improves the survival chances because the patients often require aggressive supportive treatment once the respiratory complications begin. One of the biggest misconceptions spreading online right now is that the claim that the hantavirus spreads easily from person to person, like COVID-19 or influenza. According to the current scientific evidence from the WHO and the CDC, most hantavirus strains do not spread efficiently between humans. However, there is one particular strain that continues drawing intense international attention because limited human to human transmission has been documented in rare situations. That strain is known as the Andes virus, primarily found in South America, and is the center of many current global health discussions. The Andes strain worries scientists because it behaves differently than most people. Researchers studying previous outbreaks found that evidence suggests close, prolonged contact between the infected and the individuals may contribute to limited person to person spread. And under these certain conditions, however, the experts continue that emphasizing that the available evidence does not support widespread airborne transmissions, which is similar to the highly contagious respiratory pandemics. Public health organizations currently state that the transmission involving the Andes virus appears limited and generally associated with close household style exposure rather than the casual public interaction. Recent international attention is also intensified after the reports involving the cruise ship, the MV Hantavirus, where multiple confirmed angle viruses infections and several deaths triggered emergency health responses and the international monitoring efforts. Cruise ships are considered especially concerning during the infectious disease investigations because they combine confined indoor environments with international travel routes involving thousands of passengers from multiple countries. The health agencies launched contact tracing operations, passenger monitoring programs, and quarantine protocols as a concern spread across global media coverage. Now, according to the World Health Organization outbreak reports, officials currently assess the overall risk to the broader public as they very continue low. Monitoring the situation, obviously, closely because of the unusual characteristics associated with the Andes strain. The cruise ship outbreak immediately triggered memories of COVID-19 pandemic for many people around the world. During that pandemic, we all know, cruise ships became symbols of how quickly the infectious disease could spread through a densely populated travel environments where passengers share the dining areas, entertainment spaces, ventilation systems, and sleeping quarters. Now, with this hantavirus entering the global headlines, public concern has risen again regarding the transportation, biosecurity, international outbreak preparedness, and the ability for our governments to respond quickly to the emerging infectious disease threats. Some critics argue recent events reveal continuing weaknesses in our global response system, while others believe the rapid identification and monitoring efforts demonstrate that the public health surveillance systems are functioning effectively. Me personally, I find it ineffective based on the COVID-19, which the whole world has went through, and it was devastating. Another important factor behind the rising concerns involves environmental and climate-related questions connected to the rodent populations. The scientists have increasingly studied how changes, weather patterns, warmer winters, altered rainfall cycles, and ecosystem disruption may influence the rodents' breeding behavior and migration patterns in some regions of South America. Researchers reported increases in hantavirus activity following major fluctuations in the rodent populations linked to the climate conditions as well as the food supply changes. When rodents populations surge, the likelihood of infected rodents entering homes, barns, storage facility areas, campsites, and urban spaces also increases, creating greater opportunities for human exposure. In North America, one of the primary rodent carriers associated with hantavirus is the deer mouse. These animals are extremely common in rural areas and often enter sheds or garages, barns, attics, and cabins, searching for food or shelter. Many people never fully realized the rodents were present because the animals are typically nocturnal and they leave behind only tiny traces of contamination. Even after the rodents leave an area, dried urine or droppings can remain dangerous because of the disturbing contaminated materials that may release microscopic infectious particles into the air. This is one reason the public health agencies repeatedly warn people not to sweep or vacuum rodent droppings directly. Now, according to the CDC recommendations, enclosed spaces containing possible rodent contamination should first be ventilated thoroughly before cleaning begins. Officials recommend wearing gloves and masks, spraying disinfectant directly into contaminated areas, and carefully wiping the materials rather than sweeping them aggressively into the air. Sealing entry points, removing food sources, and controlling rodent populations remain some of the most effective prevention measures available. Farmers, campers, construction workers, warehouse employees, pest control workers, rural homeowners, and individuals reopening seasonal cabins are generally considered among the higher risk exposure groups. The scientists have known about hantavirus for decades, but one major moment that brought widespread American attention to the virus occurred during the from the early 1990s in four corner regions of the southwestern United States. Several young and otherwise healthy individuals suddenly died from unexplained respiratory failure, leaving doctors and investigators searching for answers. The researchers eventually linked the illness to a hantavirus strain known as sin nombre virus, also caused by infected deer mice populations in the region. That outbreak dramatically increased the awareness about hantavirus pulmonary syndrome and led to an improved surveillance and research programs across the United States. Today, diagnosing the hantavirus remains difficult because of the early symptoms overlap with so many other common illnesses. Doctors often rely on exposure, history, blood testing, PCR analysis, oxygen monitoring, and chest imaging and laboratory findings when evaluating the possible cases. There is currently no universal approved antiviral care specifically for the hantavirus pulmonary syndrome in the United States, which means treatment focuses heavily on supportive intensive care measures. Patients with severe infections may require oxygen therapy, ventilators, blood pressure stabilization, advanced ICU monitoring, and aggressive respiratory support to survive the critical stages of the illness. Another major challenge during the outbreak like this is the role of social media plays in spreading the fear, misinformation, and conspiracy theories faster than verified information can travel. Some online posts falsely claim hantavirus is rapidly mutating into the next global pandemic or spreading uncontrollably through public populations. According to the World Health Organization and the CDC statements currently available, there is no evidence supporting claims of widespread uncontrolled human transmission. Public health experts continue stressing that the hantavirus remains rare and primarily connected to the rodent exposure. Not everyday public, interactions. However, the unusual characteristics of the Andes strain mean the scientists are continuing to study the transmission patterns very carefully. Now, the recent outbreak has also reignited a larger conversation about the global preparedness, environmental health, and urban expansion, and the growing number of zoonotic, the zoonotic diseases, which are illnesses that originate in animals before spreading into the human population. Many of the major infectious disease events throughout history include various influenza strains like Ebola outbreaks, coronavirus, and other emerging viruses involved some form of animal to human transmission. As human populations continue expanding into wildlife habitats through deforestation, agricultural, mining, and urban development, the scientists warn that the interactions between humans and animal carriers may increase over time. At the same time, experts emphasize that the hantavirus is not behaving like some of the highly transmissible respiratory viruses out there, which are responsible for previous global emergencies. Prevention strategies remain focused mainly on the rodent control, sanitation, and environmental safety, and a public awareness rather than widespread lockdowns or social restrictions. Understanding how exposure actually occurs is one of the most important tools for reducing fear and preventing unnecessary panic. Most people will never encounter the hantavirus directly, but awareness becomes critical for individuals living or working in environments where rodent exposure may occur. One reason this story has become so emotionally powerful is because it touches on several major public fears all at once. It involves deadly illnesses, international travel, and environmental uncertainty. Cruise ships, possible human transmission, and memories of recent pandemics. When those elements combine, public anxiety naturally increases even if overall risk remains relatively low. And this is why clear communication from scientists and their health agencies becomes extremely important during the outbreak involving unfamiliar viruses or limited public understanding. Now, as investigators continue studying the recent cases, the scientists will likely focus heavily on understanding whether environmental changes in international travel patterns or viral evolution are influencing the outbreak's behavior. The researchers are also examining how the Andes virus interacts with the human host, whether certain exposure conditions increase the transmission risk, and how global monitoring systems can respond more effectively to future incidents. Infectious disease surveillance is an ongoing process, which also is involving laboratories, hospitals, and governments, researchers, and international organizations, all working together to identify unusual patterns before they grow into larger public health crises. For viewers watching tonight, the most important takeaway is this: the hantavirus is real, serious, and potentially deadly. but it also is relatively rare and primarily connected to rodent exposure rather than the casual public contact. The recent international concern centers largely around the unusual Andes strain and the cruise ship outbreak situation, not evidence of uncontrolled global spread. Staying informed and understanding the proper prevention methods while also recognizing the symptoms early and avoiding misinformation are the best ways to approach this developing story responsibly. Fear spreads quickly during uncertain moments, but knowledge and factual reporting remains some of the strongest tools we have for understanding the world around us. As always, I want to thank you for spending time with us tonight for this in-depth investigation and discussion into one of the most talked about emerging health stories in the world right now. If you found this report informative, please make sure that you subscribe and share this video with others and continue following the channel for future updates involving global outbreaks, geopolitical developments, and public safety concerns, emergency alerts, and worldwide investigations. We will continue monitoring all verified developments involving the hantavirus, international response efforts, and the environmental health trends, and any major scientific findings connected to this evolving story. Until next time, stay informed and stay prepared. Question the headlines carefully, and remember that understanding the facts is one of the most powerful defenses against fear and misinformation in an increasingly uncertain world. Peace.